too quiet.
Make sure. I wanted to start by welcoming everyone here today. My name is Susan Branson, Executive Director of the California Transportation Commission, and I'm pleased to let you know that we do have commissioners that are here today. Would like to recognize them. We have Commissioner Chair Bob Alvarado, and to my left is Commissioner Joe Tavallone. We have Commissioner Jim Madaffer, and Commissioner Carl Guardino is planning to join us here shortly. The other commissioners were unable to make it, but they did want to make sure that you all knew that this kickoff event is very, very important to the Commission. It will set a framework for us in moving forward and developing guidelines to implement programs. And this meeting is webcast, and so they're very interested in viewing that as well. So just initial housekeeping, want to make sure that everyone here knows that there are two main exits. There's an exit over here, and there's an exit in the back out to the front. And then for restrooms, if you exit out here, the back of the room, there's a kind of a round area to the left with a security station, and what you would need to do is fill out and sign out for a card key that can get you into the restroom. So with that, I'll turn it to Commission Chair Bob Alvarado.
Thank you. Welcome everybody, including those that are joining us by the webcast. Both today's forum and the workshop tomorrow will serve as the formal kickoff by the CTC regarding the efforts to implement SB1 and get the funding, which will result in helping to maintain and rehabilitate a lot of not only very in need road beds, but also in some of the bridges that we got. We probably don't need to talk about the importance of this bill. All we need to do is just drive over any road in California and you understand why this bill was very, very not only important, but just necessary. It required a lot of work by the legislators, the administration, and all the stakeholders that supported the bill. Just a tremendous amount, a tremendous effort. I think probably the first time that this industry is coalesced around an issue in a long time. We understand the role, the Commission understands the role that we're empowered with to ensure that these funds are expended properly and that the agencies expending those funds are accountable to the taxpayers. We've been through this before with SB1, so it'll be nothing new. With Prop 1B, so it'll be nothing really new as we go through the process with SB1. We'll be hearing from a distinguished list of speakers today, and the Commission appreciates all that participated. We've had some that had to, for family reasons or for whatever reason, had to bow out today, and we welcome their input at the future Commission meetings rather than here at the kickoff. And lastly, I want to thank everybody here in the room. This is probably the most important step in the process. The last Commission meeting, there's quite a bit of discussion on how the formulas are going to work. This is where we really get into those details and work this thing out so that everybody has a fair shot as we go through. And $52 billion is a lot of money. But if you look at where we're at in our infrastructure, it's not nearly enough. It's just literally, in my mind, it's a down payment on what we really need to start expending to bring the infrastructure of this great state back into a class that used to be and should be today. So with that, I'll turn it over to Susan and we'll get started. Thank you again.
All right. I held off. I wanted to introduce two center speakers here that are here today. This Senate Bill 1 is called the Road Repair and Accountability Act of 2017. Oh, no. And this bill would not have been possible without the leaders that we have in this state. And, Senator Bell could not be here with us today. He wanted to be here, but Senator Bell and Assemblymember Frazier, I just want to thank Assemblymember Frazier for being here today. He is an ex officio commissioner. He sits on the commission. He is just a valuable asset to the commission and to me personally, and Senator Bell is as well. And I just want to thank you for everything that you did on Senate Bill 1 and for being here today. And with that also, we have Secretary Kelly, who also worked tirelessly and has been a true partner to the commission, and just his leadership effort in where we are today. When Senate Bill was passed, I just think the leadership in the state is amazing. So I just wanted to start there. And then wanted to let you know a little bit about the meeting. Senate Bill 1, as you all know, has expanded the role of the commission. It is requiring that the commission provide oversight and accountability for transportation infrastructure investments in a number of new and existing programs. The meeting today is intended as a very high-level overview of the Senate Bill 1 accountability provisions and the programs that the commission is now responsible for. It's really an opportunity for the commission staff, but all of you, all of the stakeholders out there to hear from key leaders in not only the legislature, the administration, but also the regional agencies, local agencies, environmental stakeholders, social equity, business and industry, and others. And we greatly appreciate those who have made time to be here today. And again, I would just really like to thank everyone, and for all of you who are here, that have made time and that are viewing on the webcast. I do want to let you know we have a lot of speakers, and so it is a somewhat tight agenda today. If there is time at the panels, we would like to allow for question and answers. We may not be able to, but if any of you have questions, we do. I think on this slide, it shows that we have an email address where you can send questions into, and we also have sitting here at the desk is Doug Remedios and Curtis Vandermolen, and they have speaker cards. If we don't get to your questions, we will be back in touch with you. And I guess the one other thing, just to let you know, because there may be a question out there, I'm going to hit the question off early. We will be forming work groups and we would request any of you interested in a particular program or all of the programs to please let us know. Give us your name, give us the programs you're interested in, and so that we can be in touch with you. And for those viewing, again, we have a link on our website. And if you don't have time to fill out the sign-up sheet, just leave a business card and write on the back the programs that you're interested in. We will be, tomorrow on Friday is a key day for us to be in walking through all the various programs. Again, that's going to be still somewhat high level. And so what we'll do is break off, and we do look at convening workshops throughout the summer and the fall. So with that, as part of this today, the plan is that we will hear from the key leaders that were instrumental in the passage of Senate Bill 1 today, Assemblymember Frazier and Secretary Kelly, followed by, I'm going to provide a very high-level overview of Senate Bill 1 from the perspective of the commission and the requirements that apply to the commission. And then we have a series of panels. So with that, I will turn it back to Chair Alvarado.
Thank you. We'll just jump right into this thing. Again, as Susan mentioned, we have good news and bad news. The good news is Assembly Chair Frazier is here with us today, as well as Secretary Kelly. But Senator Bell had a family issue and is not be able to join us today. All three gentlemen played a big part in getting this deal put together, along with a lot of other folks, obviously. But these three gentlemen were pretty much the point of the spear to get this through. Each of the speakers' bios are posted on the commission website, so there's really no reason to read the whole bio here today. Assemblymember Frazier was elected to the California State Assembly in 2012 and represents the 11th Assembly District in the East Bay. He's currently the chair of the Assembly Transportation Committee and also serves as an ex officio member of the CTC. California State Transportation Agency Secretary Brian Kelly was appointed by Governor Brown as the first Cal STA Secretary on July 1st, 2013. And the Cal STA replaced the Business Transportation and Housing Agency and is focused solely on transportation. And for those in the room that know Brian, he's been a long-time transportation advocate as the head honcho in the Senate Transportation Committee. So we'll open it up with statements. Mr. Frazier.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And first I want to start off by thanking the CTC commissioners and staff in advance with all of the work that we collectively have done together. As a reference point to when we were crafting the bill and working with Susan on about the shop oversight, that was monumental to be able to start that process. And I can't thank the commission enough for being part of the equation for transparency, accountability, and being able to guide projects through the STIP and other processes in California. And you have to be commended. You don't get the thanks that you deserve. And I wholeheartedly and from the bottom of my heart thank you. But to get to the crux of what we're here for, we care about avoiding delays, and we have to show the public we're serious and committed to putting their investments to work. Encouraging the CTC, we want to triage, if needed, to develop guidelines going forward. Focus on the new programs and the congested corridor program, for example, and programs that may be present, that might present a higher risk of failure on project delivery. We want to look at those and make sure that your input is weighted going forward. Generally, our goal was to vest the CTC with responsibility for providing oversight, not control. There's a big difference there. We want the CDC to guide policy and monitor and report, but we also want the department experts to deliver the projects and programs and them to be responsible. We don't want the CTC taking on responsibility for project delivery. Overstepping these lines will blur the lines of accountability, and that's never a good thing. We want to make sure that everybody has that stay in their lane, no pun intended. But in other words, CTC, tell the department the outcomes that you expect based on the legislature's guidance. We need the guidance, and then get out of the way and let them deliver. And if input is needed for how or why, then obviously we want you to be part of that process. But I wholeheartedly encourage the CTC to work with the department to make processes as smooth as possible. We know going through the processes can be like slogging through mud. And we want to make sure that we streamline that money so the money can be utilized in an expedited fashion and not tied up in red tape and bureaucracy. Because if the processes are too cumbersome, because of legislation, we need to seek legislation and guidance to fix all of that. And that's where hopefully the ex officios that serve on this body can be a part of that corrective process. And a lot of people know that SB 1 had a lot of fingers in the pot. And at the end, it came together. If it doesn't make sense or doesn't work to encourage the best value or the most reasonable approach, work with us to make a remedy of that. And again, a lot of the decision-making process was done in the 11th hour before the deadline. And I don't think that you could actually take such a complex issue and get all the details driven. I mean, we tried, and a lot of it was done well. But I think there's still things that are left to interpretation, and I think that we can all work together as a working document. One area we probably should have been more explicit in is the area of transparency. we and I will work with the CTC and the department moving forward to develop reasonable, coherent reporting requirements that, A, make sense to lay people and experts alike, B, include appropriate performance metrics. And I think this is actually one of the most telling things is performance metrics to the public, how their dollars were utilized and how well that process performed. C, provide data that we will need to evaluate the programs in the future and work with the business process going forward. Then we'll need to work on how we make these reports easily available and understandable to the public. We take things for granted sometimes with the public, and again, this is monumental. This is historic about the amount of money that's going into the transportation sector, and we want to have the opportunity to continue the good work that Prop 1B did. But one of the great things about this SB1, it's not accruing debt. And we're going to continue to be able to have this sustainable process going forward that we all figured in how we could make it work going down the road with the indexing of the gas tax and some of the other facets of that. But, you know, remembering we're all on the same team, trying to improve the lives of Californians. SB1 is not perfect, and I've mentioned that several times, and it will have flaws, but we need to be able to find those flaws, work through them, and make sure that they're within the intent of what we're trying to accomplish. The CTC and Caltrans, you do your best by implementing SB1 quickly and as reasonably as you can, and where it doesn't work, we need to be able to understand why and how it can be done better. Again, the process was, for me, was 2 years, 4 months, and 6 days, but who's counting? And a lot longer for Secretary Kelly. He had hair when he started. His words, not mine. And so, I know.
Let me scratch that out.
Yeah. But I'm proud of what we've done and how the tens of thousands of jobs that will be created, the willingness of the private sector to partner with public agencies to go ahead and move this forward. The self-help counties, how this will leverage their ability to be effective in their expenditure plans. So one of the things, and I think the whole part of this was that we were in desperate need, our roads were crumbling, and we stepped up and we took a chance and made this monumental lift work. So moving forward, we need to make sure that it accomplishes every best value that we can accomplish and that the public can be proud of what we did in their response. We have naysayers and haters who are saying that that it's not used. We got loan repayments. We had processes in place. We have the constitutional amendment, ACA 5, to lock in the money. And so here you are, the commission, the stewards of the implementation, the appropriation of money for California through the STIP and other processes, and I look forward to being part of this process for the next 8 years and going forward, making sure that, as our chairman has said, the bone-jarring potholes and the devastation to cars and trucks in California is done with. So with that, I appreciate the opportunity to speak, and I have to apologize, but I have to go to another meeting, but I wanted to make sure that was here to
Thank you for taking the time.
absolutely, thank you. Thank you.
Secretary Kelly.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I also want to thank the Commission and certainly our legislative partners, Chairman Frazier and Chairman Bell, for showing such dogged determination to get this monumental public policy achievement done. And so both they, the Commission, and even so many members of a broad coalition in support of the SB1 effort who are sitting here today. You know, there's an old adage that success has many fathers, and certainly SB1 has many parents, and the success of that. And it's the leadership in the legislature. It's certainly leadership from my boss. It's the work of this commission, who has spent years and years educating people about the needs of transportation in California and what we need to build the communities that we all want. And the commission's been a strong and steady leadership voice in that area. And finally, we got something done after really almost 30 years of ignoring the gas tax and our needs. We got something monumental done. And now we have this great opportunity to come together and put those dollars to work. And that's the part that I think we are now the most excited about. It's a lot of work to pass legislation of that magnitude. But it's going to be even more work and take more focus and determination to implement it and implement it well. And that's going to be a collective effort, not just from the commission or your elected officials in California, but really from everybody in the room working together toward building communities that we all want in this state. And so I guess the first thing I would say is, beyond the thank yous, is it's really going to be imperative over the course of the next few months that parties are working together to move the dollars and investments forward. And there's probably, in my time of working on transportation, I'm not sure I can ever recall a time where we've seen so many diverse interests coming around what transportation investments should achieve. And there's all kinds of definitions of victory there. The Commission, in many ways, has the most difficult task of moving forward on programs to invest these dollars in a way that achieve these numerous objectives. And that's not an easy task. But it's a task that this Commission has experience with. And for those who are generally outside of the transportation universe, this is the entity that we rely on for transparency, for public input, for public hearings, to communicate with the state and our local and regional partners on how we are moving forward with these programs. And the legislature has had sufficient confidence in this commission to not only do the work before, when we created the STIP many, many years ago, but when we passed a bond bill in 2006, Prop 111, it gave the commission great authority and great room to be the conduit for how these dollars will be invested, and the legislature has said we want to use the commission again. So while the challenges get increasingly difficult, we still want to use these institutions that we have in place as the place where we're going to have the dialogue, and we're going to put forth the programs and projects that will be improved by SB1. And I think I want to just take a moment to say about a couple of words about just how monumental this bill is. And that is, you know, for, again, nearly 30 years, we've cruised along with the needs in our transportation system outpacing available revenue. And SB1 holds the promise of finally reversing that trend in many, many areas. Due only to the enactment of that bill, we can now raise the standard of repair for our highways, our bridges, and our local streets and roads. We can fund transformative public transit projects to move people in a way that is cleaner, faster, and better coordinated. We can reinvest in our trade corridors to improve the flow of commerce while cleaning up emissions. And we can target congested corridors with our local and regional partners to improve travel times for commuters throughout the state. We can build better and healthier communities with improved bicycle and pedestrian facilities that improve travel for all modes of transportation and encourage healthier communities. All of that is made possible because of the enactment of SB1. All of that is part of our transportation objectives in California. There's a lot of conversation about whether or not the dollars are invested as they should be. And I just want to say to you, as somebody who spent 18 years working in the legislature, you have to, you ultimately move something like this because you listen to a lot of people and you end with a product that addresses many diverse needs. but we shouldn't fool ourselves. All of these needs are squarely in the transportation domain. And the objectives and the place we're going to invest these monies are transportation related activities. And there should be no dispute about that. All of the transportation benefits I mentioned again are because of the enactment of SB 1, and they include important accountability and reporting requirements so that we don't just use words about what we're going to do with these dollars, but that we also demonstrate it. And again, the Commission is charged with putting together these accountability standards, the reporting requirements, not just to them, but also to the legislature and the public. And I just want to commit here and now that the Commission has the full support of the administration in putting those things together and in implementing the proper accountability and reporting requirements so that all Californians are confident in how these dollars are being spent. The pending Budget Act is really the first opportunity to put SB 1 dollars to work. There's approximately $2.8 billion in the fiscal year from SB 1 to invest in our transportation system, and as I said, the administration is eager to put these dollars to work. In fact, Caltrans is now accelerating highway maintenance, bridge repair, and major rehabilitation projects into the fiscal year. That's possible only because of the passage of SB 1. Similarly, I know our local partners are now evaluating how they will best put SB 1 dollars to work to be responsive to community needs and address local street and road issues in the budget year. And the Commission, along with my agency, is charged under the bill with developing guidelines for the award of funds to projects in 5 different competitive programs. We have the opportunity to put billions of dollars to work rebuilding California from these programs in the fiscal year. And I think we should. In fact, I think we must. I think Californians are expecting no less. So the Commission has an important role in holding all recipients accountable for the use of funds. And as I said, we are committed to helping the CTC in this endeavor. I'm not sure there's really too much else to say other than let's get to work putting Californians to work, and I'm really pleased that we have this great opportunity. I guess I would just say as a high-level thing before I depart, I also have to get back to some budget meetings, but a reminder maybe to the Commission in the friendliest way possible is that you've done this before on developing guidelines to move projects, and in my view, you've done it successfully. So some of the needs and requirements have changed a little bit, and they're expanded, and rightly so in a state like California. But you're going to do this, and you're going to do it well. And you have the full cooperation of the administration on this. I would just advise you to not reinvent the wheel where you don't have to be flexible, be transparent, which you're good at, make sure you're communicating with stakeholders, which you're good at, but also be purposeful. We do have to move, and it's important that you get this right, but we also get it done, at least the first round of awards, relatively soon. So again, to the broader coalition, I just advise and hope that people work together with an aim of putting these dollars out to work for Californians as expeditiously as we can, at least for the initial round of awards that we would like to get done in the fiscal year. So that's all I have to say. Again, Mr. Chairman, I appreciate the invitation to be here today. I appreciate all of the coalition members being here today, and I look forward to getting to work with all of you on putting this thing in place. Thank you.
Thank you. And if we could just, ask a quick question, other than those few things that you said, getting the money out, being transparent, what do you think the administration's biggest goal or ask would be of the Commission as we implement SB 1?
Well, where do you want to start? No.
Not with Hillary.
I think it's important that we get to work soon. As I said, the bill contained 2 broad elements. One is formulaic, one is competitive. And a lot of the formulaic stuff is going to go directly to, for example, cities and counties. Some will go directly to the department to move maintenance and shop projects along. There are 5 competitive pots, some for public transit grants, which will roll through my agency, but you have several in the area of state and local partnership funds, trade corridors, congested corridors, I know I'm missing one or two, but what I would say is move as expeditiously as you can while you're doing all the work that you have to do with the public and bringing people along. But I think we should all be mindful that while the bill was difficult to pass, and I heard Chairman Frazier say, gee, we had our critics, we still have our critics. And there are still folks who are looking to challenge SB 1. I, like Mr. Frazier, am very proud of the work we did to get SB 1 done. I'm proud that it's a balanced transportation funding program that allows us to achieve a lot of different objectives we have in the transportation sector today. But it's also important that we put the dollars to work as soon as we can, at least for the initial round of awards. So I would say be purposeful is the highest priority for us right now.
Thank you. And I think I can speak for not only the commission, but everybody in the room that we'll do our best and we won't let you down. Thank you. Thanks for taking the time. There's a red button on the screen. Push that.
Sir, thank you. Now that our honored guests, the Secretary, thank you, Secretary Kelly, and Chair Frazier have left, is it possible for us to all come together instead of having this huge divide?
Commissioners, we were leaving this area open for our next panel.
Oh, God,
That will come
thank
up.
you, forgive me.
Yeah.
I didn't have my glasses on, so if there are
Wanted
panel
to
names.
have them
yeah.
be able to speak to the audience. So.
Great, because I kind of felt
was
Secretary
re-
Kelly was only telling you to be transparent and accountable and flexible, leaving Jim and I to do whatever we would like.
That is
Good shape over here. We're the rogue people.
I'm going to have to wait.
I think your women and men in the trades are going to make sure you're wrong on that one, sir.
Okay.
Thank you.
Right, you ready?
Susan.
All right. Okay, so we wanted to just take a minute out before we go to our panels to just talk briefly about SB1 and the requirements as they pertain to the commission. This is just very, very high level for those of you who may not be as well versed, but I'm assuming our audience, either here in the room or on the webcast, is pretty well versed. But just really the key overview of, the Senate Bill 1 revenues. And then I just wanted to provide a high-level overview of the programs that the commission will be working on that is responsible for carrying out. And then also just a slide I have on our timelines for writing guidelines. So this first slide, really, as most of you already know, Senate Bill 1 does raise approximately $5 billion a year for transportation improvements. This table is a good reference, and it will be on our website. It depicts the transportation revenue sources, when those revenue sources will be instituted, and the amount of the increase that by the increase to the various taxes and fees. And I won't go into details today for the sake of time, but it is it's a very helpful slide. This next slide depicts the amount of revenues that are expected to be generated by each of the various fees and taxes that were implemented through Senate Bill 1 or established through Senate Bill 1. And as is shown on this slide, the gasoline excise tax is slated to generate the vast majority, or the largest percentage of the funding, followed by the transportation improvement fee and then the diesel excise tax. This next slide, it lays out the various programs that are set forth in Senate Bill 1. And as shown on this slide, over the next 10 years, Senate Bill 1 will allocate more than $53 billion in revenues equally between transportation funding for projects that will provide benefits at a state and local level. So this slide really it does show the various programs that are funded through Senate Bill 1. And as is also shown on this slide, a vast majority of the funds are directed to maintaining and rehabilitating state highways and local streets and roads. Some of the projects, as Secretary Kelly mentioned, are formulaic in nature and others are competitive programs. This next slide is really an outline of new CTC responsibilities as it relates to accountability. And I won't go into all the details on this slide, But I did want to just, I guess, bring to your attention, there's a number of accountability, whether it be intention, language of the legislature, or actually specific provisions governing accountability requirements. But one that I want to highlight for you is Senate Bill 1 does state that it is the intent of the legislature that the California Department of Transportation and local governments are held accountable for the efficient investment of public funds to maintain the public highways, streets, and roads, and are accountable to the people through performance goals that are tracked and reported. The Commission will be embarking on writing guidelines, and as we do that, we will look to you to work together with us in writing provisions in the guidelines that will provide for the accountability measures that the legislature and the administration intended when Senate Bill 1 was enacted, and also to provide the accountability that we need to tell the public how these monies were invested and how they were used and the benefits that were provided. And we will look to, as a starting point, the accountability provisions in Proposition 1B, where we established as a commission, the commission did set out upfront, in progress, and follow-up accountability measures in all of the Proposition 1B programs. So that's a good starting point. It worked well, and so we look forward to working with you all on that as we move forward in the guideline development process. This next slide, now I guess I just wanted to move into the various programs that fall under the Commission's purview. Again, a very high level. We have a workshop tomorrow where we'll get into more details. This first program that we wanted to share in just a high level, the Local Streets and Roads Program, SB1, provides an increase of approximately $1.5 billion annually to local cities and counties for local streets and roads. This legislation requires that the local agencies submit to the Commission approved project lists for this funding. And within that, there's on the slide, there's specific information that the cities and counties need to provide to the Commission. The Commission will essentially serve as a pass-through of sorts. We'll collect that information transparently, make that information available to the public, but quickly transmit that information to the State Controller's Office so there's no bottleneck in getting that money out for the important projects that need to be moved forward at the local level. But what this bill also does is it has a requirement for reporting upon the completion of the projects where this money was dedicated. And it's essentially requiring that the local agencies report back to the Commission on projects that are completed, the amount of funds that were expended for the project, the date the project was completed, and the estimated useful life of those improvements. So we'll be working quickly on getting guidelines for that so that everyone understands the process that needs to take place and so that we can transparently communicate what's happening to the public with these projects. The next slide depicts the local partnership program. Senate Bill 1 provides $200 million annually for local jurisdictions that have voter-approved taxes or fees dedicated to transportation improvements. And these funds are to be used for road maintenance and rehabilitation. There is trailer bill language in process right now, and the Commission will be watching that closely and working with all of you to develop guidelines. The next program is the Solutions for Congested Corridors program. This program provides $250 million annually to projects that are designed to achieve a balanced set of transportation, environmental, and community access improvements within highly congested corridors. And the projects that are eligible, the project types are state highways, local streets, public transit facilities, bike and pedestrian facilities, and restoration or preservation work that protects critical local habitat or open space. This is a really neat program because it provides the Commission with the ability to program multimodal investments, which is something that's somewhat new to the Commission. So we look forward to working with all of you as we write guidelines for this program. The next one is the Trade Corridor Enhancement Account. This program provides approximately $300 million per year for freight-related corridor-based freight projects. There is currently trailer bill language that is being developed, or it's, so we're waiting on that. That trailer bill language will provide the statutory framework that we will need to move forward on developing guidelines. The next program is an augmentation to an existing program that the Commission has. It's the Active Transportation Program. The active transportation program, prior to SB1, it had approximately $120 million a year to program towards projects. With SB1, that program has now been augmented by $100 million a year, which was dramatic. It was needed, greatly needed, I should say. This program is oversubscribed, and this program is dedicated to increasing active modes of transportation, such as walking and biking. And we are looking at accelerating the guidelines for this and a call for projects as quickly as possible, which we will get into more detail tomorrow. The next program that the Commission is responsible for, these are not in order of any one that's more important than the other. The State Highway Operation and Protection Program is an existing program, and that program was augmented by $1.9 billion a year. This program will be, it funds primarily road, bridge, culvert repair, maintenance. It's basically the preservation and rehabilitation program for the state highway system. And with this program that's new for the Commission has been provided with a number of new roles, as well as the Department of Transportation on accountability, improved accountability measures such as allocating support costs, also tracking and better evaluating performance of how the money's used and whether or not the targets that are set out in Senate Bill 1 for achievement of specific performance benefits are achieved. The Commission has a role in annually evaluating the effectiveness in reducing deferred maintenance and improving the state highway system road conditions. The Commission is also authorized under this to actually withhold future project allocations if funds are not appropriately spent. There are a number of requirements in this Senate Bill 1 with respect to the shop. The Commission is working closely with the Department of Transportation and does have draft interim guidelines that will be considered for adoption at the June meeting. We're calling those interim guidelines because we need to be sure we're working closely and then cooperatively with Caltrans so that we don't do anything to delay project delivery and set out any accountability measures that are cumbersome and difficult to implement. So we're working closely, and you will see those guidelines at the June meeting. The next program is it's a stabilization to the State Transportation Improvement Program. And SB1 stabilized the funding for this program. As many of you know, last year the Commission was faced with a $1.5 billion funding shortfall. Projects were deleted and other projects were delayed. Significant impact on the state transportation program. So we look forward to working on guidelines with all of you and adopting a program next year that includes new projects and does not delay any existing projects. So the last slide I have here is just want to share with you the timeline that the Commission has adopted for program adoption, for developing guidelines, adopting programs. And where we can accelerate this in partnership with all of you, we will try to do that. That's our goal, is to get this money out to the best projects that will provide the greatest overall benefit to Californians as quickly as possible with the necessary accountability measures. And I think, what I would just like to highlight for you is some programs, like the local streets and roads, we're looking at getting this done very, very fast. Active transportation program, again, very quick. These are programs that we believe we're able to do that. Other programs, we know that all of you will have a lot of questions for how we define certain things, how do we select the best projects, and we know it's going to take longer. So we just, again, appreciate you all being here today. And with that, we will move to our first panel. So that this panel is a panel of state leaders, as well as we have a tribal leader here. And so we're going to need just a few moments for transition, and I'll call up the panel members. So if you can just bear with us for a minute.
Mr. Chairman, while they're setting up, I wanted to recognize Carolyn Coleman here in the audience with us. Carolyn, if you would stand. Carolyn's the new executive director for the League of California Cities. The cities, of course, and the counties are a very strong partner in the passage of SB1, and I just want to recognize you, Carolyn, and the League and the partnership that we've had. So thank you very much for being here.
All right, so our first panel, as I mentioned, is leaders representing the state and tribal governments. And just want to introduce you to our panel. We have Director Malcolm Dougherty. Malcolm was appointed by the governor as the director of the California Department of Transportation in May 2012. And as you all know, Caltrans's primary responsibility is to maintain, build, and operate the 50,000 lane miles of California's state highway system. We have Housing and Community Development Director Ben Metcalf. Director Metcalf was appointed in February 2016. Housing and Community Development provides leadership, policies, and programs to preserve and expand safe and affordable housing opportunities and promote strong communities for all Californians. We have Mr. Joe Myers. Mr. Myers serves as the Executive Director of the National Indian Justice Center, which serves as an independent resource for tribal governments and their courts. Mr. Myers is a founding board member of the California Indian Museum and Cultural Center. Since 2002, he has served as chairperson of Caltrans Native American Advisory Committee, which is an invaluable body which serves to communicate transportation issues between tribal governments and Caltrans. And Executive Director Randall Winston is the director of the California Strategic Growth Council. The Strategic Growth Council is a state agency that brings together multiple agencies and departments to support sustainable communities, emphasizing strong economies, social equity, and environmental stewardship. Executive Director Winston previously worked in the governor's office, helping to lead efforts to implement executive orders on green buildings and zero-emission vehicles, as well as international climate policy. And I did want to let everyone know today that unfortunately an Air Resources Board representative could not be here. We do look forward to working with the Air Resources Board in partnership. The Air Resources Board is critical to the Commission in everything that we do, but Senate Bill 1 also has key provisions in it that require that we work closely with the Air Resources Board and seek their input, and so you'll see them at future meetings. So with that, I have an opening question for our panel, and I have just the same question. So if we can start with Director Dougherty, from your perspective, what are the key provisions in Senate Bill 1 related to accountability, funding, and reporting that you believe should be addressed in the Commission's program guidelines? Same question for all of you.
Well, the first thing I want to do is thank you for the opportunity to be here. I'm looking forward to the dialogue and with my fellow panel members. I think it's appropriate to congratulate not only the CTC Commission, I would do the same to the chairs, the Assembly and the Senate Chair and Secretary Kelly, but I mean the whole room for getting SB1 passed. This is not big just for Caltrans, it's big for the state of California. And it's been well stated already, the deferral of what we need to have to be able to invest in transportation. And I think Secretary Kelly alluded to this. Up till then, at least for us and a lot of agencies, we were losing ground, and this puts us in a position where we think we can gain ground. And I think Executive Director Branson talked very well about what's in the bill. Secretary Kelly and others talked about what it means. But I think what's important to me, and I'll get to the accountability thing, is now we need to step on the gas and get all these projects out. We have shifted from our conversation pre-SB1 from projects like these to these projects, and we need to start getting those projects out, and I'll talk in a minute when an opportunity presents itself to talk about what we're doing as a department. But we were prepping for SB1 passing before it passed, and it was passed on a Thursday, and Friday morning we were talking about how we were going to start to get that investment out into the state of California. So the people in California could see the benefits of that transportation investment from an economic standpoint, a business standpoint, and a quality of life standpoint, and community standpoint. So on the accountability side, certainly to ask folks to support and vote for such a measure to raise taxes, raise user fees for a specific utilization, you have to make sure you have assurances in place that you're going to use that money for what you said you were going to use it, and you're going to use that money effectively. And I think for us, I think that's very important, not only to reassure folks when we're going to ask for additional revenue, but as we go forward and spend those dollars, we have to make sure we're representing, and it's clear, and it's easily seen, both transparent and accountable, as to those not only those dollars being spent on what they were supposed to be spent on, but they're being spent on the wisest investment we possibly can in the most expeditious timeline that we can, and those are perfectly appropriate. One of the accountability measures that's going to be very important to us, it's something that I've done throughout my career in managing resources, is in the shop, and I think one of Susan's slide articulated very closely, our shop program, which we do our safety projects and bridge and pavement projects and the like, is coming close to doubling. And in each of those projects, we do an environmental document, we do design, most likely right-of-way, and then construction oversight, and we've always programmed those resources to be able to deliver those projects, and now going forward, as of SB1, the CTC will be allocating those dollars, so not just the capital dollars for every project, but the pre-construction phases and construction oversight phases. And we're in full support of doing that, so that we put out there in a transparent way, in a public setting, and accountability measures in place, that we have to be able to complete those functions in the set budgets that were allocated, and we would allocate for each one of those 4 phases. It certainly creates a fair amount of work for us and a fair amount of work for the Transportation Commission to be able to do that, but then there's another layer of transparency and accountability on how the dollars are going to be utilized, not only on construction equipment and labor and those types of things, but also the engineers that are delivering. Those accountability measures are not just on the department. Those accountability measures are on every recipient of the dollars coming out of SB1. And let me digress just for a moment, because there's a lot to like in SB1. It's a multimodal transportation investment package, not only for us, but cities and counties, but also transit, freight corridors, congested corridors, active transportation. There is something in this bill for everybody to like, and I think it is a very good balance of a strategic investment in transportation in California. For us, we have already started identifying the projects that we need to deliver to meet our new programming capacity. We're coming up with hundreds of millions of dollars of projects in 18-19 that need to be accelerated into 17-18 starting July 1st, and we will have that list of projects in the next couple of weeks. From a major maintenance standpoint, we have $200 million worth of projects that we're going to drop in July, because we know the SB1 money is going to be coming later in the year, and we can front load the existing dollars that we have. We're moving forward with our accelerated bridge program. At your last meeting, we augmented 22 bridges into the shop, and in this upcoming meeting, we'll be augmenting 30-some more. It'll be over 50 bridges into the program, the shop program, because we know SB1 revenues start in November and January, and we're going to be getting a jump on that. So we know that we have to turn projects like that into these projects, and we've already started to accelerate our project delivery to be able to do that, and we know we're going to be held accountable for the investment of those dollars, not only in the capital side, but on the support side, and I think that that's very important going forward.
Ben, do you?
Good afternoon, and thank you for inviting me to be here, and thank you to the Commission for hosting this forum. I want to say I am thrilled that we are here today, and very pleased and proud of what we as a state have accomplished in the passage of SB1. Particularly reflecting just on, again, the variety of stakeholders that have come together, the variety of goals that we're trying to achieve. From where I sit on the housing side, a couple of observations. First of all, although we are no longer part of the the Housing and Transportation Agency, we still work very closely with our counterparts in California State Transportation Agency through a working group, and have spent a lot of time laying out a number of shared goals and objectives that we want to achieve from within the administration around things like strengthening our coordination on planning, improving our data and research, increasing our outreach around how we integrate these investment opportunities. This infusion of funds, additional dollars for things like research, I think are going to be really helpful to achieve all those efforts. I also, want to note that I think, we have been doing a lot of great work over the last few years trying to think about how to integrate these programs, and Randall will talk about some of the work that we've done with the Strategic Growth Council around the cap and trade programs, affordable housing, and sustainable communities to really try and bring together transportation investments with housing investments as a catalytic influence on communities. But even go back earlier than that, with the Proposition 1C funds, we were investing into transit-oriented developments and transit-oriented communities to try and really think about how we leverage those housing investments to double down on ridership, for example, and build off of existing infrastructure. I think the reality today is there is a little bit of envy here. You guys are off to the races here with this big infusion of funds. I think housing, unfortunately, is falling behind. And we have, at the state, done a lot of research trying to lay out the housing challenges that the state faces. And here today in 2017, they're very severe. We are producing annually and have been producing annually about 80,000 new homes in California every year for the last decade. That's less than half of what we know we need to have been producing, that we know we will need to be producing going forward. It's much less, it's almost a third, I think 40% of what we historically were producing back in the 60s and 70s and 80s when we had a lot more robust development and production activity going on. Furthermore, when we look at where that housing is getting built, we see a disproportionate share of it happening in California today in areas that are farther removed from the jobs, farther removed from our transit infrastructure, and compounding the challenges that working Californians face when they get in their car every morning to try and drive to a job that's even farther away than it ought to be, or find successful schools for their kids to go in. So I think we have a huge amount of opportunities, I think, to get smarter and to make sure that these investments that we're making through transportation are aligning with where we see housing production being facilitated. Hopefully that we can send a message that as we invest in communities to rebuild infrastructure, we are doing it in a holistic way, in furtherance of our climate change goals, and in ways that ask communities that are making these transportation investments to also step up and do their part and facilitate the creation of housing that meets their share of what the region and the state needs to be providing. So I think we have a lot of room to innovate here. I'm thrilled by the investment opportunities. I think that we need to approach this in a spirit of collaboration with a focus on data and metrics, and to make sure that we are thinking about those secondary effects as we plow forward.
Thank you, Director Metcalf. We'll go to Director Winston.
Thank you, Executive Director Branson, and thank you again, Chair and Commissioners. It really is a pleasure and an honor to be here, just echoing my fellow panelists. Also want to give thanks yet again to the great leadership of this state. Certainly, Secretary Kelly, who sits on our council at the Strategic Growth Council, of course, Assemblymember Fraser, Senator Beal, and the Governor. It's a kind of an unprecedented opportunity. And I think a responsibility on us is to get it right and do it efficiently, but also make sure that we're achieving a host of other co-benefits that I think that we can as we look to make these investments. I want to hone in on one part of that question with really regard to the guidelines and potential metrics and some key items that I'd want to raise that we sort of keep our eye on. Picking up on Ben's last comment here with regard to as we look to fix-it-first strategies, how we can look to incentivize opportunities for more compact and infill infill growth, both in housing and complete streets and active transportation, and in a way that helps to lower the vehicle miles that we traveled, and in turn, reaching our broader climate goals and reducing greenhouse gas emissions. So I think there are definite and clear opportunities there, as you have all touched upon. Closely related to that, and this also gets to a point that Ben just touched upon, making sure that we take advantage of opportunities to both coordinate with and leverage other investments that are going out the door at the same time. Our climate investments, of course, being a chief set of programs in that area. The SGC, we have our Affordable Housing and Sustainable Communities program, soon to release a notice of funding sometime this year. It'll be talked about at our next our next council meeting. Our new Transformative Climate Communities program, all of which together, looking at $300 or so million. We'll be working very, very closely with communities, and actually one of those programs, Transformative Climate Communities, has a match requirement, at least in terms of its draft guidelines, and certainly the funding that you all make available, I think, represents some great opportunities. So there's that point. Third, and as we look to investments, I know investments are going out quickly, but particularly in design of the newer programs, prioritizing natural and green infrastructure. Of course, with the governor's executive order from now a couple of years ago, we have looked to incorporate in our programs at SGC and work with other programs in doing so, ways to address climate preparedness as we look to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions. So this means challenges like extreme heat, sea level rise, drought, and there are tools available now. This is not, I think, an ask to reinvent the wheel, kind of to Secretary Kelly's earlier point, but we are ready here at SGC certainly to assist in that effort and being able to provide those tools and hopefully feed into your further development of guidelines. Finally, I do want to touch upon being sure that we're mindful of how we are tracking benefits to our most vulnerable communities. In our programs, again, through SGC, there's a statutory focus on the way that we benefit disadvantaged communities, but kind of in tandem with that, how we look to incorporate community engagement and understanding the needs of communities as we look to make our investments. And I think that there is a real opportunity here as guidelines are developed to incorporate ways to ensure there is meaningful community engagement, and that we're looking to measure other benefits, health, environmental, social equity, as of course we focus in on the key benefits associated with our transportation investments. And again, there are lessons learned here that are readily available through programs at SGC and other programs, so I don't think we need to reinvent the wheel there. Thank you. With that, I'll stop.
Mr. Myers?
Thank you. Thanks for the invitation to be here today, and I don't know if I can adequately represent the entire tribal communities throughout California, but I'll give it a shot. There are 110 tribal governments in California that operate to a greater degree, some sovereign powers, and they have governmental infrastructure at their local levels. I think since 1996, we have been dealing with a positive relationship with Caltrans through the establishment of the Native American Advisory Committee that meets quarterly, and we have done some progressive work over the years and getting the word out that there's a need to include tribal governments in transportation decision making. And I'd like to say that the relationship with Caltrans across the board for tribal communities has been very positive. We can't satisfy everyone, of course, but I think the majority of tribal groups in California look forward to our quarterly meetings that we have in Woodland, and they are attended quite regularly by the director of Caltrans. Although he has a extremely busy agenda on a daily basis, he does take the time to come out and visit with the folks and answer their questions about Native American issues in terms of transportation with Caltrans, and it's been very effective. I think that we need to understand that the tribal communities around the state and outside of the state are not communities that are walled off from the rest of the mainstream society. We have roadways in Indian country that are state-owned, that are owned by the federal government. We have reservations in California where state roads and interstates do cross tribal lands, and so there's a need to include in the dialogue the issues that tribal communities have with regard to transportation. There was back in the 1960s an effort by the federal government to abandon the ability of tribes to exercise their sovereignty. That federal strategy never worked out, but during that time there was an effort to privatize Indian reservations and rancherias around the country, and that took hold in California because California was one of the sites where this termination policy was begun. Although that policy never materialized all the way to the finish line, nonetheless, there are roadways on reservations that are no longer owned by the tribes, that are owned by the counties in the state. So there is a need for the dialogue to continue, and I think that it's important for the California public, which includes tribal communities, to begin to partner with each other at the local level and to engage in more dialogue. I think that one of the bright spots of new legislation, and SB 1 is new legislation that a lot of folks have look at it as a bright spot for the future, and rightfully so. But you can do a lot with how you implement the legislation, and we can do a lot with the guidelines. The guidelines can sometimes make or break new legislation. And I would hope that in the guidelines that the commission would look very carefully at what the tribal needs are and include those needs in those guidelines, because the legislation itself does not speak to the issues on Indian reservations in terms of transportation. But we can do that in the guidelines. And I think the commission would do well to take a close look at how we can make those guidelines work for tribal communities in California. I think that tribes thus far have been able to access ATP funds to deal with things like putting together safety programs at the local level for pedestrians and bicyclists. And I think also the partnering issue is very important at the local level and at the state level. But another thing that has been problematic with tribal governments and the state of California has been the contracting issue. It's very difficult for tribes to contract effectively with state agencies, and I don't see why we have to have that as a roadblock for progress, but nonetheless, it has been in recent years. But I think that everyone throughout California looks forward to what SB1 is going to bring to the infrastructure of California. And I think that the California legislature and Governor Brown have certainly beat Trump to the punch, because he talks about infrastructure and Congress does as well, but it's not consistent, and there's been a lot of talk, but the action has not been forthcoming at the national level. That's it.
Great. Thank you all. I have just a question for each of you now, and I'll start with Director Doherty. Senate Bill 1 has specific performance measures that Caltrans will need to achieve with respect to the SHOP funds, the new SHOP funds. And so, Director Doherty, what performance metrics have you set for the State Highway Operation Protection Program, or the SHOP, and how do you see that those performance metrics will be achieved?
Well, SB1 specifically captures performance metrics or outcomes for 4 high-priority categories within the SHOP, the State Highway Operations Protection Program, specifically what we'll obtain in improvements to bridges, pavement, culverts, and then ITS elements, intelligent transportation systems, the electronics and cameras and signals that we have out on the highway. And it specifically talks about over a 10-year horizon that we would pave over 17,000 lane miles of pavement. We would fix an additional 500 bridges. I'm trying to remember how many culverts. I think it was in the neighborhood of 50,000 culverts. And then also a performance metric specifically for the ITS elements. And that's specifically embedded in SB1. When we were talking about SB1, AB1, SB1, and ultimately what the bills were combined into, as well as the governor's proposal, we were clear that we wanted to try to articulate what you would get for that investment of increased revenue. The self-help counties and local agencies have a very good track record of identifying programs when they put it out to voters. So when you vote for it, you know what you're going to get. It's a lot harder to do on a statewide basis, but we clearly wanted to attempt to try to articulate what you would get out of it, and specifically in those 4 categories. So I think that it specifically talks to that. We are getting much more sophisticated in asset management to talk about the improvements that will occur over all of our asset classes over the upcoming periods of time that are identified in the 10-year SHOP program. All these things come to the California Transportation Commission for adoption, and we'll continue to do that. But specific to SB1, it specifically calls out outcomes and performance metrics that we'll have to achieve there. The bill also speaks to $100 million worth of efficiencies, and we are certainly committed to be able to not only accomplish that, but to exceed that. And I have no qualms in being able to do that. Some of our challenges is going to be articulating exactly where and when that would happen. Now, we are doing a lot of process improvements through Lean Six Sigma and those other and things of that nature. And in a lot of cases, you can identify those process improvements and capture quantitatively what you're going to get out of it. One other thing that we will do to try to find efficiencies is to utilize different tools like CMGC or design build. And I know that we will achieve some savings on the right projects by using, for example, construction management general contractor, CMGC. The difficulty is exactly how much did I save by delivering that project through CMGC? And I may not have had that savings at the time we negotiated the contract with the contractor in lieu of going out and doing a design bid build, but I know there are huge advantages accomplished by having the contractor on board at an earlier stage and then going forward into the construction phase of the project by not having as many change orders and those types of things. But now I have to quantify that. How do I quantify that? And I know that it's there, but it'll be a little bit more difficult. And the expectation is going to be, and it's not an inordinate expectation, is going to be for us to identify where we're going to find those efficiencies and then monitor as we go along those efficiencies and then hold them in our hands when we get to the other end of the calendar. And that's going to be the toughest point. I don't have any qualms about us exceeding that expectation and finding savings in our efficiencies. It'll just be identifying them, quantifying them, and then presenting them, I think, is the one thing that we'll have to work on.
Thank you, Malcolm. All right, Director Metcalf, I have a question for you. What do you believe are the most important SB1 funded programs under the Commission's purview that will help in achieving state housing goals? Are there any that?
Well, yeah, thank you. I think that, look, for probably the last 15 years or so, HCD has been actively prioritizing its collaboration around transportation and really pushing in the transit-oriented development space. And I think going back, again, 10, 15 years, you look at really exciting projects like the MacArthur BART Transit Hub in Oakland or the Westlake MacArthur BART Station in Los Angeles. These are investments that were funded in both those projects out of the Proposition 1C funds, really with a desire by the voters to be investing in infrastructure and housing with connections to transportation. And I think those kinds of investments and efforts have really laid the tracks for, where we're going now with, I think, our cap and trade funded programs. I think where, the legislature is thinking as they put more money into things like the active transportation program or the intercity rail program or our other low carbon transit investments. So I think those areas are places where we can continue to double down, and again, it's a win-win-win. We're investing in this important transport infrastructure. We're facilitating the creation often of dense housing in the communities where people want to live, proximate to jobs and opportunity, and we're delivering on the state's climate change goals. And I think, if you look at the Vibrant Communities Framework document that the Governor's Office of Plan and Research put out, if you look at the work ARB is doing in their scoping documents, the vision for California over the next couple of decades is one where we are facilitating, denser, walkable communities, and we have here sort of a perfect alignment of opportunities to do that. On the flip side, I'd say as we look at these investments, we also need to make sure we're asking more of the local jurisdictions in which these funds are going, and by that I mean, there are certain expectations and obligations under state housing, under state law today around the need for local jurisdictions to be doing robust and real planning for their share of housing that supports what we expect to be accommodated within those regions. And then to be reporting back on the delivery of those units year after year after year. And I think we need to also be much clearer with all of our partners that this is a sort of a package deal, if you will, and we need to be doing, as we make these investments, we need to make sure that our partners are stepping forward to honor the commitments that they're making to achieve those regional and state housing goals too.
Thank you, Ben. Director Winston, I think you somewhat answered my question in your opening remarks, but just thinking about what you shared with us as far as the Strategic Growth Council's programs that you currently have and you're responsible for, and the funding. When you look at Senate Bill 1 and these new programs, how would you measure success with respect to, when you think of the state infrastructure goals and the state goals surrounding climate change and the performance measures, because Strategic Growth Councils, you have expertise in that area. Mm-hmm. What are the performance measures that you think would be specifically that we should be considering in these guidelines, and how would we measure our success? I flipped it a little bit on you, but I think as you were talking about leveraging funding.
Yes, Executive Director Branson, that's a great question, and one that we're, I think, in the thick of giving a good amount of thought to. particularly with the broader goals around infrastructure and how that's tied to both our climate mitigation and adaptation goals. So just by way of some context, we're in the thick right now of actually developing clear performance measures kind of vis-a-vis the governor's executive order and the establishment of a clearinghouse on adaptation right now. And we are building that, or anticipate building that, into our climate programs, chiefly affordable housing and sustainable communities and transformative climate communities. So kind of a roundabout way of saying that, as we look to work more closely with the commission in, the deployment of these investments, particularly the newer programs, congested corridors and the local partnership program, but also, those which we've been working with you all for some time, like active transportation. I think we'd like to take the performance measures that we do establish through our current efforts and make sure that what is in our climate investment programs, affordable housing, sustainable communities, and transformative climate communities is shared with, from a guidelines and performance standpoint, with what you all are developing. I think that whatever the case may be in terms of performance measures that are established, a critical role that I see us playing is being able to coordinate and better integrate across programs. The scoping plan, as you know, is in the process of being finalized, and some of the goals that Alva's been mentioned and that we're working on are finding a higher degree of concretization, if I can use that term. And I think the timeline is actually right, pretty closely consistent with particularly the new finalization of the new programs. And so I'd hope that we can be supportive in helping to bring those performance metrics into your programs.
This is my last question. It's for Mr. Myers. You mentioned that there's been difficulty, challenges in the past with contracting with the state. And looking back on past programs, when we look back, we see that there has not been a lot of funding that has flown to the tribal governments. What do you see beyond the contracting issue with the challenges to assuring that tribes receive money through the programs authorized in Senate Bill 1?
I think that, is it on? Yeah. I think the problem that we've had historically with regard to the relationship between not only the state of California, but other states and tribal communities, has been the federal policy of being indifferent to that relationship. Historically, probably the states have been the worst enemy of tribal communities, but that isn't what is there today. I think we have to work together for a better future, and we're doing that, I think, in California. But what has happened with regard to funding is tribes have been dependent upon the federal government for direction for funding, instead of working out partnerships at the local level with their states and their counties. So we're going to have to do more of that in the future, but and get away from the federal policy of the federal government being the overseer of tribal communities nationally. So I think that we're on the right track. I think that California is playing a lead role, especially in transportation. We've had DOTs from other states come to our Native American Advisory Committee meetings to check on the viability of the advisory committees, the Native American Advisory Committees, whether they work and to what degree, and other states want to take up that model and use it. So I think things are looking up, and I think if we can include in the guidelines an effort to look at the issues of Native American communities with regard to SB 1, I think that would be the thing to do.
Great, thank you, Mr. Myers. And with that, looking at the time check, I really want to thank all of you for being here today, and just know that we look forward to working with you and your staff in partnership as we move forward on developing guidelines. And just thank you for sharing your perspectives today. They will be used by us as staff, as well as the commission and everyone here as we get into the details. So we look forward to working with you. So thank you again for being here. And we'll use this then as a transition to bring up our regional agency panel. Thank you.
You too. Yeah. Hey, give him help. Give him help. I will.
Hey Alex, how you been?
Welcome.
Good to see you. How are you, man? Glad to be here.
Welcome, Tony. Thank you for coming.
Thank you for having us. I went to NARC and I had some. Yeah, they are. And oh, here.
Hey Tony, how are you? Good to see you. Because I had a few things on specific programs that are kind of like a few that might feel like
On the screen. The red button on the screen.
Test.
If everybody could take a seat again, we'll move on to our next panel.
Okay, let's settle down. We got to go to work.
Okay. Well, now we'll be hearing the perspective of the regional transportation agencies. As mentioned previously, the speaker bios are posted on the Commission's website, so I'll be keeping my introductions brief. We'll begin with each panelist giving their perspective on SB1. What are the key provisions related to accountability, funding, and reporting that should be addressed in the Commission's program guidelines?
We'll start off with Alex Bockelman. Alex is the Deputy Executive Director of Policy for MTC and oversees strategic financial planning, the management of federal, state, and regional funds, legislative advocacy, public affairs, and planning.
Thank you, Mitch. It's great to be here today, and $54 billion for transportation in California. What a great day, finally. I want to again echo thank you to the leadership of the legislature and the governor for getting us here today and for the multimodal transportation package that really does have an emphasis on fix it first. MTC really looks forward to partnering with the CTC and improving our transportation system. The state of good repair needs are vast, and the need to leverage the investments and modernize our system is a good opportunity. The congestion and mobility needs are immediate, and the Bay Area will move quickly to deliver transportation improvements as soon as possible. Now, I want to echo the sentiment of Secretary Kelly earlier to resist the urge to recreate the wheel. I think the SB1 revenues provide a really great opportunity to achieve the plans that we've been making. So I think that we should really harness the key state and regional plans that are underway, such as our asset management plans, the goods movement plans, our regional transportation plans, sustainable community strategies, and short-range transit plans, and the SHOP. There's so many. And also really take this opportunity to build on the performance and accountability structures that we have in place and really find strategic improvements that we can make through the SB1 revenues. Also, I think striking the right balance between the formula and the discretionary competitive programs, trying to create the flexibility and certainty for local jurisdictions and regions to address their pressing transportation challenges, while also being able to forge the strategic partnerships to address statewide and interregional needs. I think it will be important for the CTC to look for opportunities to use the dollars to incentivize better statewide policy outcomes. I did want to just make a few points on some of the specific programs in addition to that. On the local streets and roads program, with over $200 million coming annually to the Bay Area, it provides an amazing opportunity to finally improve our pavement condition and, most importantly, keep it at an improved condition over the next decade as compared to falling by 10 points, which is what we would have been looking at without SB1. So that's an amazing opportunity. But SB1 really does also provide an opportunity to strengthen statewide asset management practices and look at other best practices such as GHG reducing recycling paving technologies. So I think we should also be looking at that. In terms of the SHOP program, obviously there's been decades of underinvestment in the state highway system, so MTC looks forward to finally having some money to bring the state highway system to a state of good repair. But in particular, I think the investment provides an opportunity to put the O back in SHOP. So we look forward to that in terms of looking at more investments in ITS, ramp metering, and other innovative measures. MTC has been using our federal funds towards operation projects on the state highway system, which have demonstrated success in reducing congestion. So we look forward to being able to work collaboratively with Caltrans and CTC to leverage funds, both state and regional, to make more improvements on the operations side. In terms of the Solutions for Congested Corridors program, overall the commute times in the Bay Area are the highest levels on record, and the Bay Area has the dubious distinction as having the second worst congestion in the U.S. So obviously this program provides a really amazing opportunity. I think following not recreating the wheel again and following the Prop 1B CMIA process should be a model for partnership where regions, Caltrans, CTC, transit operators, and other local stakeholders, really put together key projects to improve mobility in congested corridors. The San Mateo 101 and Marin-Sonoma 101 in our region, as enumerated in the legislation, are both important corridors that have parallel transit and bike pedestrian options. The region applauds the unified corridor planning approach that will deliver multimodal transportation options along these and other corridors through this program. With respect to the Trade Corridor Enhancement Program, The Bay Area has the third busiest container port in California, so we definitely recognize the need for a big infusion of money into our goods movement and our freight infrastructure. To that end, we recently adopted a 2016 goods movement plan, so we feel poised and ready to make investments in this area. And we do think that retaining the current corridor targets and splits that have been discussed through the California Freight Investment Program makes sense given the significant input and stakeholder review and the ability to get moving quickly on that. In terms of the local partnership program, I think it's important to continue the historic focus of really rewarding and providing certainty to local jurisdictions for their critical transportation projects, and also really giving an incentive for those jurisdictions to go out and pass local self-help transportation measures. So I do support a more balanced approach to formula versus discretionary, with something along the lines of 50-50 or 60% formula and 40% competitive, to make sure that we are achieving that reward, but also having an opportunity to have good statewide partnership and policy outcomes. Lastly, on the active transportation program, the needs are so vast in this area. In our region, the last cycle, we had $165 million in project requests over the amount of money we had, so that was about 7.5 times. So we really look forward to the $100 million infusion into this program in terms of being able to meet these critical needs. And it's hard to contain the excitement and limit comments to only 5 minutes on SB1, but I will stop there.
Thank you very much. Next, we'll have Tony Boren, the Executive Director of the Fresno Council of Governments. Tony is responsible for programming and policy development, intergovernmental relations, supervision and control of all work activities at Fresno COG related to Measure C implementation.
Thank you, Mitch. Before I begin my remarks, although I'm the Executive Director of the Fresno Council of Governments, my remarks today will reflect the 8 San Joaquin Valley COGs and the 4 million people that we represent in terms of the thoughts that I'm going to share today. I think in general reflect that. So with that said, Fresno COG and the San Joaquin COGs in general are very pleased and excited about the passage of SB1. We recognize that it is the largest ongoing transportation infrastructure funding legislation ever passed in the history of California. We believe that SB1's focus on repair and rehabilitation aligns with what we in the San Joaquin Valley have been hearing from our communities, which is focused on repairing the existing streets and roads first. Of course, that's not to say that the Valley does not have a need for capacity increasing projects, because our region is one of the fastest growing in the state and is likely to remain so for the foreseeable future. However, having said that, there is strong consensus among the 8 San Joaquin Valley COGs that repair and rehabilitation of the existing transportation network at both the local and state systems is where the priority needs to be, and we believe that SB1 does that very, very well, so we're very appreciative of that. I'll provide some comments now specific to some of the individual programs. With regards to the Local Streets and Roads program, given that the history that the CTC has previously had no role in the local streets and roads apportionment process, we look forward to working with the CTC to establish guidelines that will ensure the formula funding flows to our cities and counties in a timely manner. There's a little concern on our part that given the new CTC responsibilities for reviewing city and county project lists, reporting to state controller, and receiving reports on completed projects, the process has the potential to bog down from what was essentially a very effective and time-efficient formula-based pass-through program to cities and counties. So again, we understand the need for oversight, accountability, transparency, but we fear that some of this could end up choking off the timely flow of the projects. We would hate to see requirements for I'll be a little bit extreme here, but public meetings for an AC overlay project, right? That's just too much. So again, we're just conscious of that and wanted to highlight that fact. With regards to the State Highway Operations and Protection Program, unanimous consensus among the Valley COGs that the state highway system in the San Joaquin Valley was in desperate need of repair and rehab funding. So we were very excited to see that SB1 has the over $1 billion for that very issue. We believe to make the program even better, that we would like to see the SHOP program be expanded beyond the 4 current eligible categories that Malcolm had mentioned earlier: pavement, bridges, culverts, and ITS, to include operational improvements. We believe there's an excellent opportunity to leverage SHOP funding with other components and projects such as auxiliary lanes to help leverage everyone's dollars. There is also a little bit of a concern, again, that given the CTC's prominent new role in the SHOP program, there's the potential for the SHOP process to bog down given the CTC's new responsibilities for oversight. Now, some of those comments came from actually our district, Caltrans district staff, so again, just wanted to share that with folks. With regards to the STIP, all of the COGs are appreciative of the stabilization funding for the STIP that is included in SB 1, but the truth of the matter is that this funding just returns the STIP to its former standing. And with that in mind, and again, given that the projected population growth and VMT growth for both the state and the valley is going to increase, we believe there will be a need for additional capacity increasing projects on the state highway system in the years ahead, and hopefully that we can address that issue. Some of the other issues, some of the other smaller programs on the local partnership program there, again, I think, and you'll hear this over and over again, the issue is competition versus formula. 6 of the 8 San Joaquin Valley COGs now have sales tax measures in place. And in general, I believe most of us would favor an allocation process that favors a formula distribution process over a competitive bid process. We understand the CTC staff is recommending a 75% competitive, 25% formula. We align with the Self-Help Coalition. We think it should be the reverse, 75% formula and 25% competitive. I think our concern is that whenever we're competing on a statewide basis, there's always the issues of scale and size. How do we compete with San Diego and its project in terms of the volume of traffic, et cetera, et cetera? State Route 99 has maybe 120,000 trips a day. The 710 probably has twice that. So again, when we have to compete head to head, that's a problem for us. So again, we just want to create that awareness. I'm sure it's nothing new there. With regards to the active transportation plans, again, this is something that if you really want the San Joaquin Valley and its communities within the valley to participate in the greenhouse gas planning process, you're going to need to help them, right? And so that means the COGs are going to need to help them, because quite often the cities, the nature of the beast is that they're generally small staffed. There's quite often frequent turnover, so you may see 1 or 2 city managers, 3 or 4 public works director in the span of 5 years. And so what started off as a project, hey, we've got this bike path ready to go. By 3 or 4 years down the road, we're having the phone call with the use it or lose it discussion. So again, this isn't a criticism of our small cities, it's just the way it is. And so we just want to make sure that everyone recognizes for example, in the Valley, we have 62 cities, 16 of them are over 50,000 people, and the remainder, 46, are 25 or below, some even smaller. So in the interest of time, I'll stop right there and turn it back to Mitch.
Thank you very much. Next, we'll have Gary Gallegos. Gary is the Executive Director of the San Diego Association of Governments. He's a nationally recognized expert in transportation, land use, regional public policy making, and binational planning. Gary?
Thank you, Mitch, and thank you for inviting us. Well, look, I'm going to start by sharing that, my perspective is, the last time we got new money into transportation, we got that through a bond, so we kind of borrowed it from the family, we thought, and then later on turned out to not be general obligation bonds. It turned out to be transportation paying for it, so we actually borrowed it from the kids. So this time, and congratulations and kudos to all our elected leaders, the CTC and others that helped get this passed, because this is actually really new money. It's ongoing money, it's indexed money, and so this is something that I think can have a long-term impact on all of the state of California. And with that, I think it brings both some short-term issues and some long-term issues. It brings some challenges and it brings some opportunities. And so first, I think the good news is many of these programs are programs that we've already done before. So I guess, my encouragement to the CTC is, and echo some of the other comments that have been made here, is, let's not reinvent the wheel. Let's build on what we got. Look at the fact that this is long-term, so don't let the perfect be the enemy of the possible. So, if we want to get, because I also think there's headwinds. There's folks that, since voters didn't vote for this, and there's a lot of folks that are going to be looking, are we really getting what we're paying for? Because it isn't coming for free. We're going to see gas taxes go up, registration fees go up. And so how do we show progress and show progress soon? So, know that this is a long-term piece, and you don't have to let the perfect be the enemy of the possible. I think we can start quickly based on a lot of the experience that you all already have. And knowing that you can review these criteria, they don't have to be locked in stone forever from here, that you can review them on some regular basis. I think it gives us a great opportunity to do, because we've been doing a lot of this stuff on the cheap for a while, and I'm going to echo something that Alex said, and probably more germane for many of us in the urban parts of California. But we have underinvested in the operations piece of SHOP, and the O has been lost in SHOP. I think this gives us an opportunity to start making some of those investments that will bring relief to many users of the system on a daily basis. And then the other suggestion I would make is try to avoid siloing ourselves. And I think we're all tend to be a little guilty of that, so we'll look at a SHOP program different than we look at a STIP program, different than we look at local partnership program, and the money that new money that we got for transit. And to the extent that we can find ways to incentivize for all of those to work together, because I think a frustration that at least we hear from our public in San Diego is that the only thing they see permanent are orange construction signs that says under construction, and it looks like not enough gets done, and it looks like it takes too long, and it's forever. And so I think we have an opportunity to mix SHOP improvements with STIP improvements, with transit improvements, with local partnership improvements, to really try to leverage something so that we can reduce those administrative costs, reduce those construction costs, and try to get a bigger bang for the buck. So I think there's some opportunities there in terms of how you approach the program. In terms of performance metrics, trying to figure out how we measure these, but they ought to be simple, and they ought to be something that, hopefully we can understand. I don't know, I got a specific recommendation that we know exactly what the target should be for every one of these things, but keep it simple and keep it so that, they're easy to do, and that it doesn't become a bureaucratic nightmare. And the fact that these are ongoing funds, I think, give the commission an opportunity to think about this, about not only today, but what does it look like 5 years from now? What does it look like 10 years from now? And the last thing I would close on is, I think collectively the state got a big boost out of the Prop 1B bond piece. But one of the things with the bond piece is the focus was on construction, because we had to build stuff. But if this is going to be an ongoing program, I also think it's important that we show success not only in my locality of San Diego, or not only in the Central Valley, but throughout California. And so I think as you look at some of these dollars, we're going to have some of them used to build capacity, right? So you get projects ready. Because unfortunately, from the time that somebody dreams up a project to the time that we actually cut the ribbon when somebody uses it can be decades. And so, how do you take a piece of this and invest it so that if there are areas that, for example, don't necessarily compete well today, well, how do you guys play a role in helping those that aren't competing well today compete better in the future? Because it doesn't all have to happen on day one. As an ongoing source, I think we can do a lot better job of helping more people around the state become more competitive. So those are my thoughts this afternoon, and again, thank you for inviting me here this afternoon.
Next, go to Mara Toomey. Mara is the Executive Director of the Association of Monterey Bay Area Governments and the current chair of the Rural Counties Task Force. Mara has more than 30 years of transportation-related experience, including 20 years in executive management.
Thank you, and thank you for having me here today. On behalf of the Central Coast Coalition and the Rural Counties Task Force, I want to thank everyone who worked together to provide SB1 and the exciting opportunity it provides to enhance our transportation system. As the Commission works to implement SB1 and develop program guidelines, I believe the most important considerations are balance, flexibility, equity, and accountability. In terms of balance, we need guidelines that balance the needs of large urban regions with small rural regions. The state is best served when all regions have a transportation system that promotes economic growth, sustainability, and livability. We need guidelines that balance the need for transparency without making reporting requirements so costly that they become a barrier to participation. Every dollar spent should have a clear purpose and benefit to transportation. We also need guidelines that balance formula and competitive components, understanding the benefits and limitations of each. Formula programs can be simple, low cost, and provide a reliable source of funding, particularly for small agencies with limited funds. And competitive programs can provide funding for the very highest priority projects in the state and impress the need for competition among our agencies. In terms of flexibility, we need guidelines that provide clear framework of priorities and requirements, but leaving room for constantly changing needs, technologies, and environmental concerns. We need guidelines that support a wide range of projects in both small and rural areas and large urban areas, understanding that California is a diverse and complex state, and different regions require different solutions. In terms of equity, we need guidelines that promote and ensure the full participation of all regions so that all Californians benefit equitably from their investment in SB1. And in terms of accountability, as a recovering auditor, I was thrilled that the transportation bill included accountability in its title, the first time I can remember. And no doubt, as public servants, accountability is a key element of all our jobs. However, as we develop the accountability elements of the guidelines, it's important to focus on the most critical goal, the prudent and efficient use of public resources to enhance our transportation system. I think it's important to remember that almost all of the projects that will be submitted in all these programs will be submitted through the regions and through a process that has already vetted these projects in a comprehensive and public way. And we should build on that process, not duplicate it. And again, I come back to balance. A balance between reporting and monitoring procedures that provide transparency and promote the efficient use of resources while remaining reasonable and low cost, ensuring the largest number of dollars are spent on the transportation system itself. Thank you for this opportunity.
Thank you, Mara. Next up is David Yale. David is a Senior Executive Officer at LA Metro. He is responsible for transportation planning, programming, grants management, and strategic long-range financial forecasting.
Thank you. Thank you, Mitch and Susan, for inviting us to speak today. I haven't been up to Sacramento in a while. I've been working on Measure M. Before I begin, I'd also like to thank the SCAG region for their member agencies for allowing me to represent your collective perspective today. Whether or not we are in a defensive posture for SB1, we need a bold, long-haul plan for these funds. And today, I'd like to offer a promise from the SCAG region, a strategy, and a few Southern California facts. Before I begin, please know that I will not personally have any horses in this race, as my last day at Metro is 3 weeks from tomorrow. So I will be leaving public service, but not the business. I'm going to take a sabbatical, and then I'll be coming back. On behalf of the 6 counties in the SCAG region, I offer our promise to pull together a bold long-range plan for these vital funds. This is kind of the reverse of a self-help measure. We've got the tax in place, and now we have to kind of talk about what we're going to do with it. Whether or not there's a threat here, we need a long-range view of how we're going to use this money, and so that's the emphasis of my talk today. The provisions that you will get from a long-haul plan are necessary for long lead projects in any event. So whether or not we're in a defensive posture, putting together a big picture of what this can actually do is one of my main points. Measure M got 71% of 3.1 million votes cast. And we need to show what can be accomplished with these user fees. Measure M went out 40 years. So I believe without that long lead, the public sector can't assemble the long lead projects that we need to put forward. The fees can accomplish many, many things. over the long haul, and they must be protected for the users and the promises we make to those users. So I think that's one of the critical things we need to do, including a maintenance of effort of the taxes that came before this, so that we can put together this big picture view of what we're going to do for the public. 1-year plans, 5-year plans, or even 10-year plans are not enough in my view. Looking at the long haul is the best way to put forward a defense, and it's the best way to put long lead time projects on the right course to success. I'd like to talk a little bit more about the strategy here. As I said, we use 40 years in Measure M, and the state needs to now rally itself to aid us in our promises, to spell out how much we can get and on what basis these funds will be distributed, so that we can put together long-range plans that show the real possibility here. If the state can show us more about the distribution of these funds, we promise to provide detail at the level necessary to provide the information necessary to defend the fees and to avoid a repeal if that repeal ever gets legs. I will now briefly turn to Southern California and a few facts about us. We move 46% of the state's freight by tonnage and 59% of it by value. California has 6 of the 10 most congested highway segments in the nation. All 6 of those are in Southern California. Southern California agencies have a strong partnership, and we are meeting next Friday to discuss these issues and our promise that I'm making to you today. SB1 improves Caltrans' ability to be a partner with this partnership we've already created. We found over the past several years that Caltrans' inability to maintain its own system has become a real barrier to accomplishing the corridor projects we need to accomplish. So it's super important that Caltrans got the lion's share of this money for state of good repair. That's I think, going to help everybody get more done for the state. We represent 19 million people in 190 cities, plus unincorporated areas, and we stand ready to assemble a body of information that can be used to flesh out the detail of what it means to keep the fees in place. Our long lead time projects depend on doing this anyway, and so we're ready to do that. I myself will be here to help from the outside, but not from the inside Metro, and so I just want to close by saying we must be bold and emphasize this long-range plan in support of these long lead projects. Okay.
Thank you. Let me just throw out a question to whoever, or how many of you want to answer it. David was just talking about long-range planning, and one of the things we've heard is the expectation on all of us to put taxpayer money to work as soon as possible, deliver benefits quickly to the traveling public. That's one of the reasons in the past the Commission has often put an emphasis on programs that fund construction, the construction phase of a project. And we've also seen some challenges in our competitive programs when we're funding projects that have yet to complete the environmental process. So just looking at the next couple of years, do you have enough projects that could be ready to go for construction funding?
Mitch, I'll start. I think the short answer to that from a San Diego perspective is yes, in the short term, but we need to also spend some money on the development side to not only, and our approach has been sort of a corridor approach where we've looked at these corridors as complete corridors where it's not just road improvements, but it's environmental enhancements, it's transit pieces built into it, it's active transportation pieces built into it. So our North Coast corridor is probably a good example of that, and so it's a long-range plan where we know that we're going to need dollars of all different colors to do that. So we're already on projects like that. It's got rail improvements that are ready to go. But we got other corridors where we need to start getting ready on new stuff, right? And so short term, yes, but also long term, we're going to need help, I think, in getting other corridors ready so that, you know, the pipeline stays full.
Mara?
Yeah, and I would agree with Gary. Again, in my regions and in the rural counties, there are projects ready to go fairly quickly, and we should fund those. But I think, you know, we need to step back and realize this is long-term funding in perpetuity. And so we need to make long-range plans and think about what it's going to take to develop those projects for the future. You know, when we had Prop 1B, that was basically short-term funding. We wanted to get projects out the door. We needed to do it quickly. We had very clear statutory deadlines that we needed to meet. But now we're looking at, you know, how are we building the system of the future? And we need some money to develop projects and do pre-construction so you'll have more projects ready for construction in the future. And given some of the funding constraints of the last few years, particularly in the STIP, many regions are desperate for funding to do that pre-construction work.
In the MTC region, I think I would just echo yes, yes, yes. I think we're ready to go. But I also think that we have to keep building the pipeline. And also, I mean, a lot of this money is fix-it-first money, and we have a huge backlog in that area. I think we're ready to go. We've, you know, been getting projects ready to go for goods movement, knowing that someday we were going to have money for that. The transit needs in our region are extensive, and obviously with the transit, the TIRC program that already existed, we have a whole wealth of projects that we were hoping that we would compete well for those funds. So I think that, you know, yes, 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 bring it on.
Metro had engaged a couple of years ago in a process called Operation Shovel Ready, and this was to get our projects ready for Measure M. Many of these long lead time projects are underfunded when they arrive at the shelf-ready point. You don't fully fund them from a self-help tax or from an SB1 or from a local contributor. You've got to assemble all of that together. And I think the state in this first tranche of SB1 funding should partner with us in preserving local finance capacity to enable acceleration of projects in the next tranche. This should be an acceptable strategy for you in the transition as we go from 0 to 100 miles an hour with SB1 in terms of trying to deliver more projects. We're ready to accelerate projects.
We are very, very ready, Mitch. I mean, you may recall that the San Joaquin Valley was the only, in 2006 with that, we got $1 billion there for 99, right, to develop a plan for 99. So we have a list of projects from that exercise that are lined up ready to go. So we are very, very ready to go. So we'll hit the ground running.
That's good to hear. Just touching on another theme that was mentioned, you all represent unique geographic areas. Every area has unique transportation needs. Now, how can we best structure our programs so that projects can fairly compete regardless of where the project is located?
Well, I'll take that because I always complain about this, but I think you need to develop guidelines that are flexible, that they're inclusive, that they recognize that some of your projects are going to be complex and comprehensive corridor related, and that some of the projects within the program may be simpler solutions because that's really all you need. I think you need to have requirements and an application process that are clear and straightforward. And we need streamlined processes that minimize the cost to applicants, because that just takes away from transportation projects in the long run. And I think when you put your guidelines together to reemphasize something I said earlier is that remember the projects that are being submitted have already been vetted through a comprehensive and public process as part of the developments of the RTPs. And so, you know, some of them don't need a lot of additional vetting. And so we need to think about that when we build the guidelines.
Mitch, I think I'll try to use this analogy to see if it works. In terms of think of high school sports, right? In terms of regional, right? We think that Division I high schools, right? They compete against fellow Division I high schools, right? If they were to compete against a Division III high school, they're probably going to lose the Division III, right? So, to the extent that it may be possible for the CTC to look at the state and try to draw comparable regions. So, for example, we may have projects in the valley that fare more, favorable with projects from Mora's area where we don't with Dave. So again, that kind of approach is something that we think could work out.
Mitch, and I would suggest to the group that, the TC, looking back may offer some suggestions of how to look forward. And so TCIF was an example, I think, where there was quarters that were defined, and then within those quarters, there was, sort of a process to bring the best projects forward. So there may be ways that you can have some geographic equity, but still have competition between those sub-geographies to make sure that the absolute best projects are coming forward.
Thank you. We've got a couple of minutes for our transition to our next group. So I just want to thank all of you for participating and for giving your comments today. As a person who's going to be very involved in the guidelines, I found them really helpful, and I look forward to your continued participation as we hold workshops and develop the guidelines. Thank you.
Thank you.